Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. My guest today is the award-winning columnist and best-selling author Anna Quindlen, whose opinions and eloquence never fail to fill me with delight and pride. Why, you ask? Pride? Why? Hello. I don't know if you remember, but you and I met you the first time coming home from the Women's Conference in Houston in 1977. You were a young reporter, and you had on your lap this big cowboy hat you were bringing home for your boyfriend. And I've always felt as if I'm just watching you, I don't know, almost like a mother.
Well,
and your mother had just died
right?
Shortly before then, and I knew that was very important to you.
Well, we've known each other too over the years.
Yeah,
I mean,
now we have. Yes.
My oldest son said at college once, New York is the biggest little small town in America.
It's true.
And his classmates who actually came from small towns looked at him like he was nuts. But
Right.
you know at some level that it's true.
It is, and Manhattan especially. When I was in the city council, they think people who live in Manhattan are out of their minds.
Right.
You know, because they think it's, and God knows what they think. But you live a couple blocks away from me, so we are even in the same neighborhood.
That's right.
So did you always want to be a journalist?
No, I never wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a novelist.
A novelist.
And
That's interesting.
When I was a teenager, I couldn't quite figure out how you could be a novelist and make any money at it, which continues to be a problem up until the present day for most fiction writers. And I was editor of my school newspaper. I really liked it. I think there's a subset of reporters who were well brought up girls of a certain class who suddenly were urged to go out into the field and talk to strangers, ask people rude questions about money and sex and power and position, and go where people didn't want them to go, and they sort of went, "Hotcha, I've died and gone to heaven." And that's how I got in the business.
Yeah. Did you find people were more willing to talk about sex than money?
No, I don't think so.
No?
I think
Okay.
those are still the big two.
All right. So you've gone on now, and you wrote a column, then you reported, and you told me also that the Houston conference was your first page story.
It was my first page one story in the
Was
Times.
that exciting?
I remember.
It must have been.
Oh yeah, unbelievably
Yeah.
thrilling.
How many first page stories did you have?
Oh boy, I can't even remember.
So you reported, then you were head of the City Hall Bureau?
I was never head of the City
Oh, I'm
Hall
sorry.
Bureau. I was just a reporter in the City Hall
Oh,
Bureau.
too bad.
I never got the big promotion.
But then you went to write a column.
I did the About New York column.
Now, what brought that about?
I'd always wanted that job. Always. I mean, from the time that I'd first been aware that Mike Berger had started that column, and then when I was first at the paper, Francis X. Klein's, one of the great writers in all of journalism, had it. And I really wanted it, and I was 29, and I was getting ready to leave the paper because nobody had offered it to me. And my friend Jeff Schmaltz, who was then an editor at the paper and later wrote brilliantly about AIDS for the Times, said to me, "Did you ask?" And I said, "No." And he said, "You don't ask, you don't get." And it was one of the best lines. It's guided me through the rest of my career.
That is a very interesting thing.
You don't ask, you don't get. So I asked, and I got.
And did it made a big difference in how I was just thinking that you differ from a lot of other very successful women in that you spend a lot of time and a lot of love and a lot of interest in family.
Right.
And so you've got this whole balanced life, right?
Yeah, but I got really, really lucky, Ronnie, at one point, and I always feel like I have to say this because people's reputations are sometimes skewed all positive or all negative. I decided to leave the paper because during the time that I was deputy metropolitan editor, which made me the highest ranking woman at the paper, I went on maternity leave, had a baby, came back, was pregnant immediately again, and had another baby. I had two little boys who were only 17 months apart. And I was going to leave completely. And A.M. Rosenthal, who was the executive editor, who had a very warm spot for me during my entire career, in an instant made up this column called Life in the 30s, which enabled me to take my experience raising my kids and basically use them for material for 3 years.
Great.
And it kept my foot in the door. It created a whole new way of looking at the world for Times readers. because really there hadn't been anything like that that was so personal. And it really made it much easier for me to combine family and work than it was for a whole lot of other women, and Abe made that possible.
And you've continued basically doing that, it seems to me. Interest in family, or interested in the kind of issues around you. I don't know, but reading your books, it sounds almost like it's something I know so well. I mean, your most recent book, with the whole question of the two sisters, and one who's a successful television, what is she, commentator? And the other sister who runs a shelter. I mean, the details about the shelter, the interest in the women that are in that shelter, that whole familiarity, somehow reflects, it seems to me, the author's life.
Well,
or interests.
That's true.
How do you
and of course,
discuss that? I mean, how do you do that?
Someone once said to me that I'd been saving string for this novel set in New York City since I was 19 years old. And the truth is that a lot of the details come out of my life as a reporter. But the other truth is that we used to have this really phony, bright line between political issues and family life, or business policy and family life. That's utter nonsense. I mean, how much of my feelings about the Iraq War come out of the fact that I have 3 children who are exactly the right age to serve, and that I'll drive them to the airport first? A whole lot of them, and that's true of so many of us. Some of the issues that, get us going most powerfully are issues that come out of our own personal
lives. Is that a
lives.
basis for feminism, do you think?
Oh yeah, feminism is a deeply, deeply intimate and personal movement, which is what made us work so hard and do such great work, and what makes it really difficult too. Because sometimes feminism is not about saying, excuse me, judge, you have to treat male plaintiffs and female plaintiffs the same. It's about turning to the man you live with and saying, excuse me, but you cannot expect me to do this, or you cannot speak this way in front of my children. And that kind of intimate revolution is much more difficult for people.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So that, I always believed that in the formulation of public policy, that women, and I suppose you have to say feminist women, I guess, have a different perspective. And just the way you said it, we have children, so we look at the war from viewing it from children. Of course, there are some men who do the same thing, but there are lots of people who look at it just objectively like a game or like a strategic battle.
Right? Exactly. But I think more and more men are moving to our side of the line rather than the other way around. Hopefully. I mean, look at the way Senator Webb couched the section of his response to the State of the Union, where this is a picture of my father who served in the war, I did, my brother did, and now my son is there. I mean, at some level, he was showing his bona fides, but at another level, he was saying, this gets me where I live. And I think that's true of all politics.
And all that fuss that was made about his comment to the president when he went to the White House. When he said to the president something about when are you going to bring the troops home, and they started. And it was. I mean, you wrote about, so they come mostly from your articles. That's really interesting. I forgot about that. I didn't put that together. So the domestic violence and all of that are different things that you viewed as writing.
Well, yeah. I mean, people said to me afterwards, gee, did you spend time in a shelter for women up in the Bronx before you wrote Rise and Shine? I said, I've spent so many days in so many shelters and so many boroughs.
That's so interesting. It's very good. The little books I loved.
Thanks.
And do they come out of addresses? Are they commencement addresses?
Actually, the first one, A Short Guide to a Happy Life, was supposed to be the commencement address at Villanova some years ago, and I wasn't disinvited. I stepped down because anti-abortion activists threatened to disrupt the graduation and so on and so forth. And so I had sent the speech to one nice young woman who said that she was disappointed and wanted to know what I would have said. And before I knew it, it was all over the internet. And so people loved it so much that we put it in this book, which has sold over 1 million copies.
I was very interested in it also because I experienced a similar thing. I mean, you said that your mother's death, which was very sad, catapulted you into almost a different world or a different way of looking at things.
Right.
And my husband died when he was 42. And I was 39, and that did the same thing to me. It changed me. It totally changed me. And it made you really want to take the most out of life.
Right. It's true. The thing that people ask me all the time, and I don't really know how to answer it, especially now that I have kids who are more or less adults. They say, well, does something really bad have to happen to you for you to get that? And I keep saying, gosh, I hope not. You know, because I don't want something like that to happen to my kids. But boy, it sure made me learn not to waste any time on the peripherals.
Exactly. I became a risk taker overnight. It was so interesting. And when I think back on it now I wonder from a different point of view as I get older, how do you tell younger people that's the same thing, that life goes very fast, so don't risk a minute of it? Right?
Well, I mean, some of that you just can't communicate. One of the things that I've gotten very tired of among some of my colleagues is this complaining about younger women and feminism. You know, they don't understand how hard we work, they don't get it. Well, how could they? I mean, my daughter and her friends assume now that the Secretary of State is always female because during their conscious years, she has been. They're going to have a whole different experience of what it means to transact as women in the world than we have. And they're going to have to learn it on their own terms. Right, but we have to keep telling our stories. We have to keep talking about history. But, you know, as we know from our own experience, some of it you have to learn on your own.
And are there frontiers for them to conquer?
I think, unfortunately, the frontier for them is overwhelmingly at home. And that's a tough frontier.
And does that has to do also with the statistics we see about what's happening with families?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it has to do with, you know, we had this little box that we labeled what it means to be women, and we blew up the box. The problem is we also had this little box of what it means to be male, which in its way was just as constraining and unsatisfactory and had as little to do with individuals as the femininity box. But we didn't really blow up that box. Few people are poking their ways out of it, you know. But if you have a revolution on one side and you don't on the other side, then you wind up with these strange disconnects. And they're disconnects in who's going to take care of the kids. They're disconnects in terms of, you know, how are things going to work in a household. They're disconnects in terms of the responsibilities men feel to their families and to the women that they share their lives with. And I think that's a real battlefield for this young generation.
You're right. I think that's going to be a very interesting question. And what happens, I mean, how do you get the people out of that generation who are the thinkers? Where does that come from? Where does your thinking come from? Where do your opinions come from?
Oh, I mean, a lot from reporting. Yeah. I think the very best opinion columns are written after you've done a heck of a lot of reporting, most of which the reader never sees in my columns. It's the bedrock that you build the house on, you know, because you don't want to find out you have no foundation for your opinions. A lot of talking, a lot of listening, you know. I mean, the great thing about living in New York and doing what I do is that you pick this stuff up every day.
You sit there and listen. Know. That's what my husband does. I go to a restaurant. He's not talking to me. He's listening to the conversation.
Exactly.
And I'm saying, come on, talk to me. I don't want to look like these people who eat like strangers.
Reporters become professional eavesdroppers, but they get a lot of good material that way.
Right. It's a very difficult kind of thing. Did your religion have something to do with how you viewed the world?
Yeah, a lot to do with how I viewed the world. In a way that people, I think, don't expect. I think that because I was a Catholic, I became a liberal. Right. Because I really felt like...
Some people believe that's the true Catholicism, right?
Well, I definitely believe it's the true Catholicism. I mean, that sense that you really had a moral obligation to do for those less fortunate, right. I really bought into that and do to the present day. And
that's, in a funny way, that I think that's the essence of Judaism also. It's the common good and worrying about other people. But that's a thing that I think is less than it used to be, the worrying about a common good. Do you think so?
I think there are still a lot of people who do a lot more than we think. I mean, you know, one of the great things about traveling to give speeches and do reporting for me is that, you know, you're tootling along thinking that the entire world is made up of versions of Paris Hilton and what have we come to. And then you blow into town and encounter some great hospice program, or some great literacy program, or some terrific program for girls, in tough neighborhoods, and you realize that out there are so many people in America who are doing the right thing.
That's a very encouraging thing.
And not for gain,
Right.
And in a gain culture, they're still saying, we got problems, I got to help solve them.
Yeah, that's a very good thing. How much speaking do you do?
Maybe two speeches a month, something like that.
And that's important for the columns you're writing? You write every other week?
Yeah, I write every other week on the back page of Newsweek. It's really good to get out of New York because you have to get a sense of really what's going on in the country. People think it's to get a sense of a less liberal environment. That's not really the case. It's more of a realpolitik environment. You get caught up in the New York, D.C. nexus, and there's all this conventional wisdom that goes around. And then you go out to some other American city and you find out the conventional wisdom is just nonsense. I mean, it's been really good to prepare for this presidential race because what people are saying out in the world and what people may be saying in New York and Washington at dinner parties is not the same thing at all.
So you think there is a common denominator and a way to reach everybody?
Yeah, I think
it's the labels, and they're used so bad. They're used not in the good spirit very often.
Yeah, but
they're also, when they're divisive, aren't they?
Again, some of these are false constructs cooked up by people like me. I mean, the whole red state, blue state divide of the last election. I mean, when you looked around, there was plenty of blue in every red state, and there was plenty of red in every blue state. Everybody was sort of mauve, and yet at some bedrock level, everybody's looking for the same thing, which is real leadership. Not jerry-built campaigns with cheap slogans and glossy commercials, but somebody who will stand up and take a difficult stand and say, this is what I believe.
But we have that now. But at least he's taking stands, right?
Well, yeah, but you wonder what they're based on.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another thing. I was watching a C-SPAN one evening because Hillary was in Iowa and she was doing a town meeting, and I wanted to see how she would do. And at one point, she mentioned a statistic about Medicare, I think it was, that 20% of the people were being treated for diabetes-related something. I'm probably getting that wrong, but in any event. And I thought, a fact. It's been so long since I've heard a fact, and that's what people want to know. They want to know that their leaders have principled beliefs based on real information.
And beliefs, I mean, their own opinions, not reflective of what they think people want to hear.
Well, yeah, and we've all gotten so tired of the focus group thing, and of course, it's axiomatic that what politicians think people want to hear is not what they want to hear. They're usually about 6 months behind the curve. So it took them about 6 months to catch up to the American people on the war. I mean, 6 or 8 months ago, I was saying,
what is this?
I went to Indianapolis, and people are really angry about this there. And why do they still think that there's such support? Well, there wasn't. It was eroding right under their feet, but it takes them a while.
But it takes them too long. I mean, now I think what we're watching in Congress is going to further bring more disenchantment to everybody, don't you? I mean, with all the games and not being able to understand exactly what's happening, and then you get confused and the whole thing goes. It's just that simple common sense that would be so good. And I think the common sense is very often also a women's perspective.
Right.
Do you?
Yeah. And because I remember when I was first going to do Life in the 30s, Abe said to me, write about what you're talking about with your friends on the telephone. Now, it was a particularly female-centric way of telling me what to write about, but the truth was I could have gotten a column out of everything that I was talking about with my friends on the telephone. And he understood that way that women deconstruct the world day after day, equal parts information and personal experience.
Have you always been confident in yourself?
I've been pretty
Yeah?
confident. Yes,
Yeah.
I would have to say so.
That's a very good trait, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's a great
very
trait.
important.
Oh, you think I'm confident? My daughter makes me look like a shrinking violet. It's just terrific.
And how old is she?
18.
That's so great. I was in the elevator today coming down to do the show, and this little girl got on and she saw these books in my arm, and she said, may I see this book? She was all dressed in her flowery kinds of clothes. And I gave it to her and I said, this is about not being perfect. You don't have to feel you're perfect. And I thought this was a great message.
Thank you.
It is what bothers, I still feel sometimes that I have to be, or I'm not being perfect, or say, what comes into my mind, I used to go to this fancy hairdresser, Pierre Michel, in the Trump building, right? Filled with all these thin women, very sophisticated, the latest styles. I always felt, oh my God, get me out of here. And I say to myself, then I'd lecture myself, I'd say, you're most likely more sophisticated than most of these other women. So it was this constant struggle about not worrying about what people think, trying to be perfect, outguessing everybody.
That's a woman thing. Because I got to tell you, when we went into early sales meetings with this book, we put book's called Being Perfect, and all of the male sales reps went, oh, what's that about?
Oh, isn't that interesting?
And all of the women at the table went, oh, I know that book. I keep saying that if I wrote this book for men, I'd call it Being Adequate.
Do you think they'd buy it?
I don't know.
What are you writing now?
I'm sort of in between. I'm giving myself a little bit of a break. I'm chair of the board at Barnard College, and it's quite time-consuming, I must say. And I have a lot of Barnard stuff to do right now, so I'm hoping to get started on a new novel in the next 3 to 4 weeks.
Barnard is a women's college. That's still a women's college. How many colleges are still women's colleges?
Oh, I don't know the number all told. There's a number of small Catholic colleges that most people aren't aware of. But in the Seven Sisters, for example, Wellesley, Holyoke, Smith, Barnard are still
Bryn
around.
Mawr? Is that still?
And Bryn Mawr. Sorry to my sisters at Bryn Mawr. Radcliffe, of course, became subsumed by Harvard Vassar admitted men. So there are not as many of us as there once was. My favorite, though, was Mills College in California, which announced that it was admitting men. And then about 2 weeks later, the uproar was so great. And the support from alums was so incredible that they went back to being a women's college.
What is it like to be at a head of a board of a women's college, not only to be chair of the board of trustees? What do you have to do? You have to raise money?
Yeah, I have to raise money. I have to oversee the big muscle governance issues, tuition, room and board, faculty salaries, the budget, so on and so forth. When we need a new president, overseeing a presidential search committee, that sort of thing. It's phenomenal. It's fantastic. It's so much work, and it's so great because I really feel that Barnard had a lot to do with making me who I am today, and because the students that we have there now are just, people say to me, well, young women, they're dropping the ball, they're not going to, and I walk around our campus and I go, oh,
no way.
No. So that makes all the difference in the world.
This is a whole new phase for you. This is a management kind of a much larger administrative, executive kind of position. You've been out on your own all this time.
I know, not exactly, I think, suited to my natural inclinations or talents, but it seems to give Barnard a kind of a visibility in the world, and give the students a sense of connection to the world in a way that's good
wonderful.
For both.
It's a wonderful combination. What do you think the advantages of a women's college are?
The confidence that you mentioned. I think it's huge.
Yeah.
Now, there's all kinds of other advantages. We're the most peculiar women's college in some ways because we are affiliated with Columbia University, which means that Columbia students can take courses at Barnard, and Barnard students can take courses at Columbia. A young friend of mine was saying at dinner the other night, I could never think of Barnard as being too big, because it is a smallish liberal arts college, or too small, because the university is right there. And that's a great, great blessing. But that sense of expectation I mean, when I was a student at Barnard, there was not the sense that we might have opinions. There was the sense that we were obliged to have opinions and we were obliged to air them forcefully. And when I got out in the world, I kept thinking, I know all these smart women. Why am I different than they are in some essential way? And I kept coming back to that sense at Barnard that we were smart, we were capable, we were strong, and we were going to go out there and do great things. That I think is really a function of women's colleges.
That's a very interesting thing.
And girls' schools, too.
Yeah. When you talked about your friends, do you have older friends your age, and younger friends?
Yes, all over the map.
And that's a very important thing, don't you think?
Yeah, it's terrific. And the other great group of friends that have been a huge resource for me in terms of staying current as a columnist is my kids' friends. You know, listening to everybody hang around the house talking about what's going on campus, the war, the relationships between men and women, things like that. That's really kept me in the loop in a way that was invaluable.
Are you going to do a book ever on friendship, a little book on friendship or something?
You know, I haven't really thought about doing that. I think at some point I'm going to do a kind of a motherhood memoir. I mean, I've written a lot of columns about it, but now I'm in the not entirely happy position of being able to look back on it from the standpoint of having all three of my kids out of the house.
I miss it so much.
Me too.
It really is the thing. Is it the thing that's given you the most? I mean, you've had a life filled with great events and gratifying things, but those nothing compares,
comes
right?
close. Nothing else comes close.
And we're never prepared for that feeling when we get that baby.
Yeah.
It's fierce.
Yeah.
Totally fierce.
Yeah.
Well, Anna, thank you very much for coming on this program, and I continue to look for your books and your columns and appreciate your wonderful insights and common sense.
Thanks, Ronnie. My husband still has that cowboy hat.
Oh, good. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.